Biographies, Part 3. Triumphs of a Monarch, Chapter 3, At the Gates of Daggerfall. For a dozen years after the Battle of Grandin Tor, the kingdoms of High Rock were at peace, and merchant ships of Wayrest, Daggerfall, and Sentinel traded near and far to all the ports of Tamriel. In my father's hall of business in Wayrest, I learned all the tracking of shipments, the balancing of accounts, and fluctuations of currencies. But Pierrick of Cumberland knew the nature of the world, and he was not content to have his son learn only the ways of peace and trade. Every morning I sparred with the Cumberland Master of Arms, and every afternoon, the weather permitted, I rode a warhorse, exercising with the Menevia Heavy Dragoons. It wasn't just practice. For 2 months every summer I travelled as a lieutenant of the mounted escort of the Evermore caravan, and 6 times we fought off hill bandits and goblin raiders and Reachman warbands. I was fortunate to have spent so much time with the hilt in my hand, for in Second Era of 541, when I was but 20, Durok, the Black Drake, spread his wings in the Reach and mustered his feral tribesmen to war. Erupting from their mountain lairs like ants from kicked anthill, the Reachmen howled down into Bankerai, burning and looting. After only 3 days' siege, Evermore fell to the sword, and the land was pillaged and its people massacred, and Hallenstand held out longer, but eventually it was also overrun by the heathen swarm. Within days they were across the river and bearing down on Wayrest. Then all were grateful that King Gardner had built new walls and battlements around Wayrest, but the town had grown so that it burst from the bounds of the old walls. Throngs of people swarmed in from the countryside, and soon it seemed that all Menevia, Gavadon, and Alcair were within the city walls. But when the Reachman storm burst upon Wayrest, the crowded conditions seemed a small price to pay for the protection of the fury of those Daedra-loving heathens. Thus began the epic Siege of Wayrest, when for 57 days and nights the Bretons of Stormhaven manned the walls and repulsed the savage assaults of our terrible opponents. The Reachmen, lacking siege engines, were unable to breach our new walls and take the city by storm, and lacking ships they were unable to block Arcada harbour and reduce the city by starvation. Stalemate. Was the invasion of High Rock at an end? Indeed, no. Your Reachman warrior, though fearless and fierce, is not at a rule very patient. The Black Drake left enough troops through regiments around our walls to keep us bottled up inside and simply marched off west into Glenumbra. Taken by surprise, the newly independent city-state of Camlorn fell and was sacked, and then the Black Drake turned his eyes south, towards Daggerfall. Fortunately, King Gardner heeded my advice to use our merchant ships as transports for the heavy dragoons, and that was how I found myself at the head of the lancers of Wayrest's finest, as we charged into the rear of the Reachmen massed before Daggerfall city gates. All Bretons now know that the Black Drake's warriors were caught completely by surprise, and how I smote Dragosh and tore down his unholy banner. They know of the sortie of the Knights of Daggerfall, in which King Bergamon finished the work we'd begun, scattering the broken army of the heathens like autumn leaves before a gale. Only 1 fortnight after, I watched, head bowed, as the kings of Daggerfall, Camlorn, Shornhelm, Evermore, and Wayrest signed the First Daggerfall Covenant. Triumphs of a Monarch, Chapter 6, Rance's War, Wayrest Besieged. Ever since my ascension to the throne of Wayrest in that momentous year of Second Era, 563, the question of who should become my queen consort was ever on mine and my advisers' minds. King Rancer of Shornhelm had a goodly daughter, Princess Raelle, and her hand was offered to me by my brother of Shornhelm, both early and often. Indeed, my mind was almost made up to accept the princess, when on a visit to Sentinel, my eyes first beheld the Princess Mariah, daughter of King Faharajad. In that moment I swore that Wayrest would have no queen but Mariah. Of course, there was another unexpected benefit. As her dowry, she bought a trade agreement between our two states that resulted in a great deal of prosperity for all. King Rancer, alas, was wroth that I had not accepted the hand of his daughter, and he withdrew his ambassador from the court of Wayrest. Although Rancer was invited to my wedding to Mariah in the spring of 566, like the other kings of the Covenant, he stayed seething in Shornhelm. I should perhaps have paid more attention to Rance's collar, but I was so taken with my new bride and the trade issues around the Iliac Bay that the mountain at Shornhelm seemed distant and irrelevant. That mistake almost cost me my throne. For over a year, Rance had been quietly mustering his troops and emptying his treasury to hire mercenaries. In the last siege of Second Era 566, he led his army out of Shornhelm in a lightning strike to the south. Rancer had marched through Alcaire and Menevia almost before we were aware of his approach. The Shornhelm advance guard reached the gates of Wayrest while the local militia we'd quickly mustered were still filing through them. This was the moment when history trembled upon a cusp. If the attacking Oldgate Lance had scattered our militia and took the gate, Wayrest could fall to her attackers within the hour. Fortunately, I was personally present at the gate, along with my Cumberland Guard. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, I had my bannermen sound the charge. I led the guard gates and my household troops out against the Oldgate Lancers. My men wore full armour, and I, though unarmoured, bore at my side the mighty Orichalk Scalpel, an enchanted broadsword of many virtues. The scalpel, drawn for the first time in anger, flashed and hummed like a blade in a sawmill as we hurled ourselves upon the lancers. Our enemies, who had suddenly found themselves opposed by armoured veterans rather than panicky irregulars, were further confounded by a sudden onset of a thunderstorm. Lashed by hail, their horses terrified by lightning, and faced with the Orichalk scalpel scything through their necks and limbs, the vaunted Oldgate Lancers hesitated, then broke, then ran pell-mell from the gate. By the time Rance's main forces arrived on the scene, our troops were all within the walls. The gates were shut up tight, but the King of Shornhelm was undeterred. The city of Wayrest found itself once more under siege, and Rancer, with more craft and foresight than the Reachmen, had come with siege engines in his train. Triumphs of a Monarch, Chapter 10, The Summons of Destiny. And that, dear reader, is my story. You've read now of my carefree youth in Cumberland House, how my father, Lord Peric, sought my training in the crafts of trade, of war, and of state, and of my first great victory over Dorak at the gates of Daggerfall, and of the vast Orichalcum load our family struck in the Cumberland mine. You've heard of the tragic coming of the Carnarton flu, and how it took both my father and the entire royal family of Wayrest, leaving our kingdom leaderless in a time of chaos. You now know with what reluctance I was persuaded to assume the throne of Wayrest. You know the halo of gold that outlined the sun on the day of my coronation. That omen of approval by the divine dispelled all my doubts and converted even my most envious rivals into heartfelt allies. You've now learned the true history of Rance's War, and how it led to the second or greater Daggerfall Covenant, embracing the Red Guards of Hammerfell, as well as the Orcs of Orsinium, who came to our aid in the hour of our direst need. The free peoples of northwest Tamriel vowed to stand together against all threats, be they from within or from without. We were soon tested. In Second Era 579, the Emperor Varen, with whom I'd concluded a treaty, disappeared from the Imperial City, and Cyrodiil once again fell under the power of the Daedric Cabal. In Varen's unexplained absence, the Empress Clivia, a descendant of the savage Reachmen, assumed the Ruby Throne. Since then, the heart of the Empire has fallen into madness, murder and decay. It is fortunate for our peoples, indeed for all the peoples of Tamriel, that the true flame of the Empire of Man still burns in the Daggerfall Covenant. These are terrible times, but our destiny lies before us straight and true as the Riemann roads. We must march on Cyrodiil, overthrow the false Empress and her brood, and restore the Empire of Tamriel. Then once more peace and justice will rule the provinces, rather than blood and fire. I hope you've been enjoying these lore readings, and if you have, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Also, come follow me over on twitch.tv/ICYIC, where I stream The Elder Scrolls Online 4 days a week. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.